My name is Sarah Mir. I'm a partner at DWF. I'm based in our Liverpool office and I specialise in catastrophic insurance. So I act for insurance companies primarily and I'm instructed to investigate accident circumstances where there's been, as the name says, catastrophic injuries. So injuries like severe orthopaedic injuries, amputations, spinal injuries and brain injuries in which I have particular interest. Well, I did law and French at the University of Liverpool. Candidly speaking, I absolutely loved the French component to my degree. I spent a year in Paris where I studied a little, worked and socialised and loved it. But the law component was incredibly challenging for me. And I think that struck something with me because it wasn't straightforward. So apart from pushing my boundaries intellectually, if you like, it reshaped how I think, how I analyse ideas and present them in a way. But also practically, the degree gave me a lot. You know, how do you stay on top of a huge workload and course content and meet deadlines? And I think psychologically I learned a lot about myself because it made me realise how resilient I am and determined when I'm interested in something. So by the end of my degree, I had so much more confidence and I feel like I'd grown quite a lot from where I was at the beginning. So then by the time I did my LPC, I had so much clarity as to what I wanted and the practical side of things. So I think those components were part of my journey, if you like, that allowed me to decide this is the career for me. I graduated from university, did my LPC, and I actually joined DWF in our admin team. And so I worked opening files essentially for partners within the business. And then a few years later, I applied for a training contract and secured it. And my first seat as a trainee was actually in the team I'm in now, in CatPI. And I just absolutely loved it. But for me, I think if I'd applied having not done the admin role, I'd have been a very weak candidate. Well, I know I was a weak candidate, but being in the business for a couple of years in that role at ground level, I just saw what the firm was all about and what I wanted to be like as a lawyer, never mind as a partner. So I think actually that was probably the best part of my career is, you know, going in at such a ground level and working up, but from that perspective where you've kind of seen who does what in the business, which profiles are good, positive, you know, where's my ambition and where are my role models coming from, if you like. A firm like DWF, they employ 4,000 odd people across the globe. You know, we're a massive firm, 30 odd offices. So it's so much more than a legal channel of, you know, trainee solicitor partner. Even along that pathway, you have your senior associates and directors who have a lot of responsibility and a lot of rewards and challenges that come with it. But stepping away from your traditional legal route, if you like, there's an apprentice in my team who's going through the apprentice solicitor route. So again, an alternative pathway. But I also, as part of my role, manage a medical team. So we have in-house physiotherapist, a physician associate who works in a GP practice half the week. And we've got a former case manager and paediatric nurse. So they're part of our medical team that are just phenomenal and they see things from a completely different light. We also then have a very strong HR team who are really supportive and they have career progressions, for example, HR business partners and what have you. And then, you know, you've got your IT teams and claims management. So when you have a business that's as far-reaching as DWF, it's absolutely not about your traditional old school linear path to law. There's so much you can get involved in, really. So I am apparently an expert in catastrophic insurance. So I am instructed primarily by insurance companies and I will be asked to, for example, investigate accident circumstances where there's been a serious or catastrophic injury. A catastrophic injury is perhaps described as not just the injury itself, but the impact it has on the individual. So for example, a motorcyclist who is in a nasty accident and will suffer a below-knee amputation will then require huge changes in their lifestyle, can, for example, a portfolio of prosthetics, or have accommodation needs, care needs, psychological support to adjust to that lifestyle. So my role would be, in that case, to investigate the accident circumstances, advise the insurer as to who's at fault. Is the insurer's driver at fault, or is there a potential argument to say that there was some, for example, negligence from the motorcyclist or another party? Once we've then addressed the accident circumstances, we'd look at how can we support this very injured person. So it's not about thinking about compensation at that point. What we're looking at is a rehabilitation path, which is why the in-house medical team are really important, because they can support the lawyers and say, well, you know, for example, how can we help someone who, I'll give you the prosthetic example, somebody who suffered a below knee amputation, how can we support them to become more independent? So what prosthetics are available, how do we trial that, and how do we support that, and how can we effectively advise the insurance company to support that? And I'm very fortunate because the insurers I work with aren't penny pinchers. It's not about, you know, saving pennies here and there. It's about doing the right thing for a very injured person and being part of that rehabilitation pathway, so that what we are providing is not just clinically mandated, but it's allowing that very injured person to move on from what is probably a horrendous trauma that they're trying to get over and through that, and get to the other end of it, so that they can live on with their life in terms of their accommodation, their physical mobility, their work. Has that changed? How can we support them? So once that rehabilitation journey is completed, which I think is actually probably one of the most rewarding parts of the job, we would then look at, the parties would then collate evidence and say, right, okay, let's both get our evidence and then look to meet at what we call a JSM, a joint settlement meeting. And 90% of the cases will settle at those meetings, as opposed to, you know, what you see on TV that we're all before the courtrooms. It's not like that really. So we will essentially have a settlement meeting where we'll talk through what are the claims brought by that very injured person, and what is it that the insurer is expected to meet financially. So it's a pathway, you know. So these claims don't settle overnight. You know, I have some claims where the injured person was a young child, so we'd wait till they're 18, if not beyond that, to allow them to go through their formative years, deal with whatever injuries they've had. And as a result of that, you know, you live and breathe these cases. They become part of your whole career, if you like. So it's an incredibly rewarding job and role that I have. And I think also it's the variety of work that comes with it. So, for example, this morning, I was looking at accommodation plans for someone who's injured, who needs a bungalow, essentially, because she suffered quite a severe spinal cord injury, so is wheelchair bound. And so we're looking at properties. The insurer is looking to purchase property for the injured party, but we need to make sure that that property is suitable for a wheelchair, for her aids and equipment to be stored, and also for carers, because she will need carers. So I'm looking at that this morning, and then next week I'm looking at interviewing police officers over an accident or witnesses. So it's extremely varied role, which is, I suppose, one of the many things I like about what I do. My family are medics. My dad's a doctor. Before they retired, he was a paediatrician, and my mum was a cardiac nurse in Liverpool. My sister's a pharmacist, so very heavy medical family. I actually debated whether I was going to do medicine at university, but for whatever reason picked law and French. So I've always had an inherent medical interest, probably because I've grown up in that world. Didn't really think much of it until I started training, and my first team was catastrophic injury. So all of a sudden I'm surrounded by a world that is slightly familiar but not. And I just loved it. And I thought, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is my calling almost, if you like, because it was that perfect balance of the medical world with the legal world, because I don't think I'd be a very good doctor or a nurse or whatever these amazing guys do. But for me, it worked perfectly. Every day I'm learning, every single day. I don't feel that, I think the minute I stop learning, I probably won't enjoy it as much, but I've been doing it for 15 odd years, and, you know, I'm still here wanting to know what's the latest prosthetic. I keep using prosthetic examples, but, you know, what are the challenges in the market of rehabilitation, for example. What are the experts' views? One thing I have a particular interest in is the impact that brain injuries have on accelerating dementia. And there's a lot of literature in the medical world, but I'm part of that research, as in I've got an interest in it. So I did a couple of podcasts last year about it, and I was essentially having a podcast with David Heaton Casey, who's a now retired barrister. He's a Silk King's Counsel, and we essentially tried to talk through what does the medical literature say about if you suffer a brain injury, what are the risks of you developing dementia. And what we were getting our heads around essentially was that dementia, the cause of it is so multifactorial. So your age, your gender, your diet, whether you smoke, even geographically where you grow up in terms of countries as opposed to cities. There are so many aspects that can be the cause to it. So it's not necessarily because you've had a trauma. And so to be part of that and to have a voice in that is just, it's such a privilege, really. So I think that is just one example. I gave an example of, we're part of rehab. I find that so rewarding that someone who's suffered something so catastrophic in their life, we can be part of that journey and support them get through it. Even though we're on the defendant side, we're actively trying to be part of that to get them through it and do the right thing. We obviously act for a lot of premium insurance companies. We have a really strong insurance team at DWF. And I think the growth is a huge strategy for us. We've had, in the last 10 months, 24% revenue growth. And I think that comes from the people to start with, investing in the right people who care, who are determined and have that, motivation and excitement that, fellow colleagues do. And I think also building relationships is incredibly important, both internally and externally. So the relationships we have with clients. And I gave an example earlier where, I have a few cases where there are children involved, and I will have those cases for a number of years. And so I will work with the insurer, the claims handler, the senior claims handler for a number of years. So as a result of that, we have quite strong relationships with them and friendships have formed out of it. And I think that is incredibly important when you're dealing with the type of work that you do in the catastrophic or major injury world. But I think also in terms of getting work, I think my line manager and long-suffering line manager, Dave Young, has always no get the basics right. And I think that's something that's resonated to me since I was at the ground level. Get the basics right. No typographical errors, for example, sounds so simple, but it's such a major thing in our world. And know your case, know what you're talking about, and ensure what you present to your client, be it advice or be it your recommendations, solutions, whatever it is you want to call them. Be prepared to explain your rationale. Is your advice clear and succinct, for example? And I think when you do that, you send a message to the reader, say, who's looking at your report or advice, or whoever's listening to you, that you know what you're talking about. You've got the basics correct, because the minute you get the basics wrong, what message does it send to the client? Well, if you can't get that right, how are they going to trust the legal advice that you're then trying to dispense? But also demonstrate the commercial realities of what you're dealing with as well. So I think if you're good at what you do, I would like to think that you will be recognised for that. And certainly that's been my experience, that when you're good at what you do, people will take notice of that. And as a result of that, work then comes your way, as opposed to this idea that you're all scrambling for an instruction. It's not quite like that. So I joined as a fresh-faced, law graduate. And I just remember almost instantaneously that I was encouraged to be me rather than fit a mould. And that has never changed in the 15 years that I've been there. And I think the fact that I've gone from an admin team to the partnership is perhaps testament to that it's culture. The other thing I love about the firm is its attitude to innovation. we all know the world we work in is incredibly tech heavy, and it's only going that direction. And the firm have, hugely invested in their technology and innovation. I think we've just signed an agreement and rolled out Copilot, which is a massive thing for the firm. So I think to be part of a firm that recognises the strength of technology is quite exciting. We've recently, all the partners attended a conference in Barcelona, which was my first conference as a partner. And there's a lot of excitement in the firm because there's a lot of growth potential, and it's finding that potential and linking in with, we've got so many leaders in this business who've got so much to give, and to collaborate with them and work together is quite exciting. So there's a lot of growth potential, not just nationally, but globally across the international spectrum. We've had acquisitions especially within the insurance sector in our Australian office. We've acquired a firm, and same with the Canadian office, and we've also recruited a pro bono lawyer in Australia. So, to be part of a business that has that much reach is pretty special. So I sit on the panel for VAC scheme students and trainees, and also for apprentices. And the advice I always give, often it becomes a question in the interview, is be yourself. Don't be. I know I'm going to say be confident, but you might not have confidence, or you might be nervous or whatever, but don't feel that you have to be a certain way. And I say that from experience, personal experience. What the firm is looking for, and certainly what I, as one of the many panel members, look for, is someone who will make a difference, somebody who's motivated and keen. It's not a 9-to-5 job, and it never will be. So I think that is number one. Number two is, I suspect most of your audience will know to go and get legal experience, but don't underestimate the experience you get outside of the legal sector. So, if you're working in part-time in a coffee shop or whatever role you're doing, there is a skill set there that you will acquire, that you will use in your career. So don't ever dismiss that or take it for granted. And then, the last piece of advice, which is probably for me the most important, because it was what my dad has always said to me, which is don't give up. Just if you want it, go for it. Don't give up. There will always be obstacles in your way, and there will always be perhaps adversity. But if you're determined, you will get what you want. I've been partner since February 2022, so just over 2 years. And my highlight was actually telling my family, because obviously you work so hard for your career. So telling my family, especially my mum and dad. But I think the highlight at the moment is being someone who can give back what I've had, because I mentioned earlier, Dave Young invested in me so much. And he kind of took me under his wing, showed me how he works and how to grow a team. And that passion was so obvious straight away. So to be able to return that is just so lovely. And I'm a big believer in people, because, as I said earlier, the culture is a really important thing for me. So to be able to invest in people, both in my immediate teams, we've got a fantastic team, but also across the business when we're recruiting for trainees, apprentices, whatever it may be, that is quite important to me, because I think this firm is based upon the people, the Jim Davises of the world, for example. And I think that spirit is so important, and I hope we never lose that. Do your research. This world there's so much information out there. So do your research, know our strategy, know our ESG policy, don't pay lip service to it, know it and understand it. We have a chief sustainability officer now in Kirsty Rogers. That's a massive deal, I think, in the legal world. So do the research and understand what it means and see if that applies to you. And I think you're not doing research for the sake of doing research. You're doing it to understand whether you fit, and this can be part of your world. And I think there's an idea that when you're interviewed at DWF, you're selling yourself to the firm, and you are. That's absolutely right. But the firm are also selling themselves to you. So that's why your research is important, for you to know that actually, I could work here, I like this value, or I'm impressed by this, or what's happening here, you know. So no one's expecting a candidate to come in and know the tech. You know, no one is expecting you to know how to run a catastrophic injury claim. Of course we're not. But what would be nice to see is good research, tell us how it works for you, and ask questions. You know, I am obsessed with asking questions and it's served my career. But I think when you ask questions, it opens your mind as to what's out there. You will learn, but it also tells me that you're interested. And then I've got so much time to invest in you. So my signature dish is one that my husband loves. So it has to then be mine, which is prawn linguine. So the reason we love it is, well, I love herbs. So parsley, you know, loads of butter with the prawns, cook it slowly with garlic. It's so simple, but it works. It's so nice. And obviously a glass of wine.